My name is Margaret Reynolds, and at 72 years old, I've learned that family betrayal comes in many forms. That night, I lay perfectly still in my bed, eyes closed but wide awake, as my son Robert and his wife Diane tiptoed into my bedroom. Through barely parted eyelids, I watched them rifle through my purse, whispering excitedly when they found my credit card. When Diane asked about the PIN, Robert confidently recited the 4 digits he thought he knew. I suppressed a smile as they crept out. Little did they know, I'd changed that PIN 3 years ago. If you've ever felt that knot in your stomach when someone you love betrays your trust, you know exactly what I felt that night. Before I tell you how this family drama unfolded, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy real-life family stories with a twist of justice. Now, let me take you back to how this all began. I've lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house in Springfield for nearly 50 years. Harold and I bought it back in 1974, just after Robert was born. We raised our 2 children here, Robert and Jennifer. Harold was a high school science teacher, and I worked as a nurse at Springfield Memorial until I retired at 65. We never had much, but we were careful with our money, invested wisely, and made sure to live within our means. Harold passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. We'd been married for 45 beautiful years. The loss was devastating, but I found strength I didn't know I had. Harold left me with a modest life insurance policy, our house which was fully paid off, and some retirement savings. Not wealthy by any means, but I was comfortable on my fixed income as long as I was careful. Robert, on the other hand, has always been a spender. Even as a child, his allowance would be gone within hours, and he'd be back asking for more. Harold and I tried to teach him about saving and delayed gratification, but it never seemed to stick. As an adult, Robert continued his spending habits. Despite having a decent job in pharmaceutical sales, he and his wife Diane were always living beyond their means. Diane isn't much better with money. She's 15 years younger than me and has expensive taste. Designer clothes, luxury cars, and exotic vacations she posts all over social media. I've tried not to judge, but when they started coming to me for loans after Harold died, I couldn't help but notice the new Louis Vuitton purse on her arm the next week. The first time they asked to borrow money was for their son's college application fees. I gave them $1,500 without hesitation. Family helps family, right? But that money was never repaid, and the requests kept coming. Car repairs, property taxes, medical bills, each time with promises to pay me back as soon as they got their bonus or when that big commission check came through. The repayment never materialized. Last year, they approached me about co-signing for their 3rd home refinance. Their credit was shot, and they were underwater on their mortgage. I finally put my foot down and refused. That's when things started to change. Their attitudes toward me shifted almost overnight. Suddenly, I was confused about conversations we'd had. They started speaking to me slowly, as if I couldn't understand basic concepts. Robert would exchange glances with Diane when I'd misplace my reading glasses or forget a minor detail. "Mom, are you sure you're okay living alone?" Robert would ask. "We've noticed you're getting a bit forgetful lately." At first, I was offended. Then I realized what was happening. They were laying groundwork, trying to establish that I was mentally incompetent. I'd seen it happen to my friend Phyllis when her son wanted to sell her house. One day she was independent. The next she was declared incapable of managing her affairs and moved to a facility while her son liquidated her assets. I started paying closer attention to their conversations when they thought I wasn't listening. Words like assisted living and power of attorney were being tossed around. I overheard Robert telling Diane, "If we can show she's not mentally capable, we can get control of her finances for her own good." For my own good. Right. That's when I started playing along. I'd forget minor things on purpose. I'd act confused about the day of the week, then correct myself with a nervous laugh. "My mind isn't what it used to be," I'd say, watching them exchange, knowing glances. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. My neighbor Elaine, a retired legal secretary, helped me keep meticulous records. I scheduled appointments with my doctor to establish that I was mentally sound. I met with a lawyer to protect my assets and update my will. I transferred most of my money to accounts only I could access. I also started noticing small amounts of cash missing from my purse. My jewelry box looked slightly disturbed sometimes. My financial statements were moved from their usual spot in my desk drawer, little things that could be explained away but formed a troubling pattern. That's when I came up with my plan. I changed the PIN on my main credit card from Harold's birthday to our anniversary date, but I kept accidentally referring to the old PIN whenever Robert or Diane were around. I'd mumble it under my breath while looking through my wallet, or write it on a slip of paper I'd leave visible before tucking it away. I wanted to see if they were desperate enough to steal from me. I just didn't expect them to do it quite so boldly. It was a Tuesday evening when everything came to a head. Robert and Diane had invited themselves over for dinner, something they'd been doing more frequently lately. I suspected they were checking up on me, looking for evidence of my declining mental state. I decided to use this opportunity to set my trap. I made my famous pot roast with all the fixings, Robert's favorite since childhood. As we ate, they peppered me with questions about my medications, whether I was remembering to pay my bills on time, if I'd considered downsizing to a smaller place. I played along, acting slightly confused at times but insisting I was managing fine. "I don't know why you're so worried. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I said, while deliberately putting salt in my coffee instead of sugar. Their exchanged glance spoke volumes. When it came time for dessert, I pretended to realize I'd forgotten to pick up the ice cream I'd promised. "Oh dear, I meant to stop at the store this morning. My memory is just not what it used to be," I said with a self-deprecating laugh. "Don't worry about it, Mom," Robert said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Why don't I call for delivery from that ice cream place you like?" My treat. When the delivery arrived, I insisted on paying. As I fumbled with my credit card, I made a show of struggling to remember my PIN. "Oh, what is it again? 5824? No, that's not it," I muttered, just loud enough for them to hear. "Oh yes, 1489. That's it. The old PIN, not the current one." I watched Robert's eyes light up as he committed the numbers to memory. After dessert, I complained about being tired and mentioned that my doctor had prescribed new sleeping pills that really knock me out. I showed them the bottle of over-the-counter sleep aids that I'd transferred to an old prescription bottle. "These are so strong, I take one and don't hear a thing until morning," I emphasized, placing the bottle prominently on the kitchen counter before saying goodnight. As I lay in bed that night, I didn't take any pills. Instead, I waited, listening for what I suspected might happen. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard the spare key turning in my front door lock. Robert had kept a key in case of emergencies despite my requests to have it returned. I quickly positioned myself in bed, eyes nearly closed but able to see through my lashes. I controlled my breathing to appear asleep as my bedroom door slowly opened. Robert peered in first, then whispered to Diane that I was sound asleep. They crept in, moving with exaggerated slowness. "Where's her purse?" Diane whispered. "On the dresser, where it always is," Robert replied, his voice barely audible. They tiptoed to my dresser where my purse Saturday. I watched through my barely open eyes as they carefully opened it and rifled through the contents. When they found my wallet, Diane held it while Robert extracted my credit card. "Are you sure about this?" Diane asked, her voice a tense whisper. "She won't even notice," Robert assured her. "We'll put it back before she wakes up." "What's the PIN again?" 1489. I heard her say it clear as day. "How much can we take out?" "Daily maximum is $500. We'll hit 2 different ATMs for a total of $1,000. "And you're sure she won't check her balance?" "Mom barely knows how to use an ATM, let alone online banking. Plus, she's been talking about giving me power of attorney. Once that happens, we can help her manage her money better." The way he said manage her money better sent a chill through me. This was my son, my own flesh and blood, conspiring to steal from me while I supposedly slept. It took every ounce of self-control not to sit up and confront them right there. But I needed more evidence. Needed to let their plan play out. As they slipped out of my room, I felt a complex wave of emotions. Hurt, certainly. Anger. Absolutely. But also a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't paranoid. My suspicions had been correct all along. As much as it pained me to confirm my son's betrayal, it also empowered me to take action. I waited 15 minutes after hearing the front door close before getting up. My hands were shaking as I called the 24-hour number on the back of my other credit card to report my card stolen. The customer service representative was kind and efficient, immediately canceling the card and noting the fraud alert on my account. Next, I turned on the small camera hidden in my bookshelf. Elaine's grandson had helped us set it up last week, showing me how to operate the simple system that activated with motion. The whole encounter was now saved digitally, evidence that couldn't be explained away as a misunderstanding or a senior moment. I knew I wouldn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my chair by the window, watching for their return, wondering how it had come to this, and steeling myself for what I would have to do next. As I sat waiting for Robert and Diane to return, my mind wandered back through the years, seeing patterns I'd been blind to before. The financial manipulation hadn't started after Harold died. It had merely escalated then. Robert had always had an entitled attitude about money. As a teenager, he'd borrow cash from my purse without asking. When confronted, he'd act shocked that I would even question him, as if he had every right to our money. "We're family," he'd say, as if that justified everything. In his 20s, he'd call with financial emergencies that needed immediate attention. Car repairs, rent deposits, unexpected bills. Harold and I always helped, dipping into our savings because family helps family. We did the same for Jennifer, but the difference was she'd pay us back, usually with a thank you note and small gift. Robert never paid us back, not once. And after a while, we stopped expecting it, which I realize now was our first mistake. When Robert met Diane in his 30s, their financial habits seemed to amplify each other. She came from a wealthy family who had cut her off for her excessive spending. Together, they lived a lifestyle well beyond their means. Credit card debt, personal loans, second mortgages, all while posting vacation photos from Cancun and buying new cars every other year. After Harold got sick with his heart condition, Robert started asking about our finances more frequently. "Do you have good life insurance, Dad?" he'd ask while Harold was in the hospital. "Just want to make sure Mom is taken care of." It seemed like concern at the time. Now I recognize it for what it was, calculating. 3 weeks after Harold's funeral, Robert asked for a loan to cover their mortgage. They were 3 months behind and facing foreclosure. I gave him $12,000 from Harold's life insurance money. 2 months later, they took a cruise to Alaska. When I mentioned this, Robert became defensive. "We needed to heal, Mom. Grief takes a toll. Don't you want us to be happy?" The emotional manipulation was always there alongside the financial. After Harold died, things started disappearing from my house. First, it was Harold's expensive tools from the garage. When I mentioned them missing, Robert said, "Dad told me I could have those before he died." Don't you remember that conversation? I didn't remember because it never happened. But Robert was so convincing, so certain, that I doubted myself. Was my memory failing? Then his gold watch disappeared, and his coin collection. Family heirlooms I'd planned to pass down to the grandchildren. When I brought it up, Robert suggested I might have misplaced them, or perhaps there had been a break-in I hadn't noticed. He even offered to keep an eye out for suspicious activity in my neighborhood. 6 months after Harold's death, Robert suggested I add him to my bank accounts. "It would just be easier, Mom," he said. "If anything happens to you, I can pay your bills without all the legal hassle. Plus, I can monitor for any fraud." I nearly agreed, thinking it sensible. My friend Elaine stopped me. "Don't do it, Margaret," she warned. "Once he's on your accounts, that money is legally his too. He could drain every penny, and you'd have no recourse." That was my wake-up call. I started paying closer attention, being more protective of my finances. This clearly frustrated Robert, who began suggesting I was becoming paranoid and difficult. The most alarming incident came last year. I discovered Robert had taken my Social Security card and birth certificate from my filing cabinet. When confronted, he claimed he needed them to help me apply for senior benefits. When I called the local senior services office, they had no record of any applications or inquiries on my behalf. I later found out from my bank manager that someone had attempted to open a line of credit in my name, but was declined due to inconsistencies in the application. When I filed a police report for identity theft, I couldn't bring myself to name Robert as the suspect, even though I knew in my heart it was him. Instead, I began working with a lawyer specializing in elder law. We created a revocable trust for my major assets. with Jennifer as the successor trustee should anything happen to me. I updated my will, removing Robert as executor and significantly reducing his inheritance. These were painful decisions, but necessary ones. I also began documenting everything: phone calls, visits, missing items, strange comments. Elaine helped me set up a simple system on my iPad to keep track of it all. I kept all records in a safe deposit box at my bank, not in my home where they could be discovered or disappear. While doing this, I maintained the appearance of technological incompetence around Robert and Diane. I'd ask basic questions about my cell phone and express amazement at simple features. Meanwhile, I was learning to monitor my accounts online daily and had set up alerts for any unusual activity. The turning point came 3 months ago, when I returned home unexpectedly after a doctor's appointment was canceled. I found Diane at my desk, rifling through my financial documents. She jumped when I entered, quickly explaining she was looking for a family recipe I'd promised her. In my recipe box, in my desk drawer, among my bank statements. That's when I knew I needed more than documentation. I needed indisputable proof of their intentions. And that's when I devised my credit card trap. I must have dozed off in my chair because I awoke to the sound of my front door opening around 5:30 a.m. Light was just beginning to seep through the windows as I quickly made my way back to bed, assuming the same sleeping position as before. Through my nearly closed eyes, I watched Robert and Diane slip back into my room, looking tense and speaking in hushed, angry tones. "I can't believe it didn't work," Diane whispered furiously. "Now we've lost the card, too." "The machine kept it after the 3rd try," Robert hissed back. "She must have changed the PIN." "So what do we do now?" Diane asked, gesturing toward my purse. "We'll say we noticed her card was missing when we came to check on her this morning. We'll help her report it stolen." I watched as they tried to rearrange my purse to hide the fact that they'd removed the card. They were so focused on this task that they didn't notice my breathing wasn't deep enough for genuine sleep. After they left my bedroom, I waited a few minutes before getting up. I could hear them in the kitchen, probably preparing to discover the missing card. I put on my robe and shuffled into the kitchen, feigning surprise at seeing them so early. "Robert, Diane, what are you two doing here at this hour?" I asked, making my voice sound groggy and confused. "We brought breakfast, Mom," Robert said smoothly, holding up a bag from the local bakery they must have picked up on their way back. "We were worried about you with those strong sleeping pills." "That's so thoughtful," I said, playing along. "Let me just get my glasses and wallet to give you some money for the pastries." I shuffled back to my room and made a show of looking through my purse. Then I called out with calculated alarm in my voice. "Robert, my credit card is missing. I can't find it anywhere." They rushed in, the concern on their faces so convincing it would have won them acting awards. "Are you sure, Mom? When did you last use it?" Robert asked, helping me search through my purse for the card we all knew wasn't there. "I used it yesterday. For the ice cream delivery," I said, allowing my voice to tremble slightly. "It has to be here. Maybe it fell out somewhere," Diane suggested, making a show of looking around the bedroom. "Or maybe you put it somewhere else for safekeeping?" No. I always keep it in my wallet," I insisted, becoming increasingly distressed. "Mom, don't panic," Robert said soothingly, putting an arm around my shoulders. "These things happen. We'll help you call the bank and report it missing." Just as Robert was reaching for my phone, it rang. I glanced at the caller ID and saw it was from my bank's fraud department, right on schedule. I answered, putting it on speaker so Robert and Diane could hear. "Hello, Mrs. Reynolds. This is Sarah from Springfield First Bank Fraud Prevention. We've detected some unusual activity on your credit card last night and wanted to verify if these transactions were authorized by you." I watched Robert and Diane's faces pale as the bank representative continued. There were multiple attempted ATM withdrawals between 2:15 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. at 3 different locations. After 3 incorrect PIN entries, the card was retained by the ATM at First Springfield Bank on Main Street. "Did you attempt these transactions, Mrs. Reynolds?" "No," I gasped, genuinely shocked at how many attempts they'd made. "I was asleep all night. My card must have been stolen. That's what we suspected, Mrs. Reynolds. We've already canceled the card and will be issuing you a new one. No funds were withdrawn since the PIN entries were incorrect." Would you like to file a police report? We strongly recommend it. I looked directly at Robert as I answered, yes, I absolutely want to file a police report. Someone violated my trust and tried to steal from me. Robert couldn't hold my gaze. He looked away, suddenly very interested in a loose thread on his sleeve. A detective can come to your home today to take your statement, the bank representative continued. Is there a time that would be convenient for you? This afternoon would be fine, I replied, still watching my son's face. Around 2 p.m., if possible. After I hung up, Robert immediately jumped in with concern. Mom, this is exactly why I've been saying you need help managing your finances. Someone must have gotten your card information somehow. Do you think it could have been that delivery person yesterday? The audacity of his suggestion made my blood boil, but I maintained my confused elderly act. I don't know. Maybe? They seemed nice, though. This is exactly why you should consider giving me power of attorney, Mom, Robert continued, seizing the opportunity. I could monitor your accounts, make sure nothing like this happens again. You shouldn't have to worry about these things at your age. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know that exact moment when you decide enough is enough. As I watched my son try to use his own crime as leverage to gain control of my finances, I felt something inside me harden with resolve. I've been sharing my story with all of you, and I wonder if anyone else has faced this kind of betrayal from family members. It makes you question everything, doesn't it? If you're going through something similar, know that you're not alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This story is far from over, and I need to take a moment before I continue with what happened next. If you're finding value in hearing about my experience, please consider subscribing to hear the full story as it unfolded. Now, let me continue with what happened when the detective arrived. Detective Johnson arrived at precisely 2 p.m., just as Robert and Diane were making excuses to leave. They'd spent the morning hovering around me, probably worried about what I might say to the police. When the doorbell rang, Robert nearly jumped out of his skin. That's probably the detective, I said, moving to answer the door. You two should stay. After all, you were the ones who helped me discover the card was missing. The look they exchanged was priceless. They couldn't refuse without seeming suspicious, so they reluctantly agreed to stay. Detective Johnson was a woman in her 50s with keen eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She introduced herself professionally, and I invited her to sit at my dining room table. Robert and Diane sat across from us, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Reynolds, I understand your credit card was stolen and someone attempted to use it last night, she began, taking out a notepad. Can you walk me through when you last had possession of the card and when you realized it was missing? I recounted using it for the ice cream delivery the previous evening and discovering it missing this morning. Detective Johnson took notes, occasionally glancing at Robert and Diane, who were trying very hard to appear concerned rather than nervous. And you were home all night? She asked. Yes, I took my sleeping pill around 9 p.m. and went straight to bed. I didn't hear a thing until I woke up this morning. Was your door locked? Yes, but my son has a spare key for emergencies, I replied, gesturing toward Robert. Detective Johnson turned slightly to address him. And you are? Robert Reynolds, Margaret's son, he replied, his voice carefully controlled. This is my wife Diane. Did either of you come by your mother's house last night? The detective asked casually. Robert hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. No. We came by this morning to bring her breakfast. That's when she discovered the card was missing. I watched Detective Johnson note the hesitation. She was good at her job. Mrs. Reynolds, do you have any idea who might have taken your card? Any recent visitors or service people in your home? This was the moment I'd been dreading yet preparing for. I took a deep breath. Detective Johnson, before I answer that question, I'd like to show you something in private, please. Robert straightened in his chair. Mom, what are you talking about? If you know something, you can tell us too. I'd prefer to speak with the detective alone first, I insisted, standing up. Detective Johnson, could we step into my study? Once in my study with the door closed, I revealed everything. The previous, smaller thefts. The manipulation. The attempts to question my mental competence. And finally, the video evidence from last night. I set up a camera because I suspected they might try something like this, I explained, opening my iPad to show her the footage. I pretended to be asleep, but I was awake and aware the entire time. Detective Johnson watched the video with a professionally neutral expression, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes. When it was finished, she closed the iPad and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Reynolds, I want to commend your courage and foresight. Many seniors in your situation wouldn't have the presence of mind to gather evidence like this. What you've shown me clearly indicates attempted credit card fraud and elder financial abuse. These are serious crimes." Her words validated what I had known but dreaded acknowledging. "They're my family," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Unfortunately, that makes it worse in the eyes of the law," she explained gently. "There's a special trust relationship there. Are you willing to press charges?" The question hung heavy in the air. Despite everything, this was my son, my Robert, who'd once been a sweet little boy who'd bring me dandelions from the yard. The thought of him facing criminal charges was almost unbearable. But the alternative, allowing this behavior to continue, perhaps escalate, was worse. "I need to think about it," I finally said. "But I do want this documented officially, regardless of whether I press charges." Detective Johnson nodded understandingly. "That's fair. We can file a report today without making a final decision on charges. I'll need statements from everyone, and I'll need to take that video as evidence." We returned to the dining room where Robert and Diane sat in tense silence. Their expressions changed to alarm when Detective Johnson placed a small recorder on the table. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, I need to ask you some additional questions," she said formally. "Where were you between the hours of 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. last night?" Robert's face flushed. "Why are you asking us that? We already told you we weren't here." "Please just answer the question, sir." "We were at home, sleeping," Diane interjected quickly. "Why would you think otherwise?" Detective Johnson ignored the question and continued. "Are either of you familiar with Mrs. Reynolds' credit card PIN number?" "Of course not," Robert snapped, but his eyes flickered nervously to me. "Why would we know that?" "Mrs. Reynolds has provided evidence suggesting otherwise," Detective Johnson said evenly, "including video footage of both of you entering her bedroom last night while she was allegedly sleeping, taking her credit card, and discussing plans to withdraw money using a PIN number you recited." The color drained from both their faces. Robert opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "That's absurd." "Mom, what is she talking about?" I looked my son directly in the eyes. "I wasn't asleep, Robert. I heard and saw everything." What followed was chaos, denials, accusations. Diane burst into tears, claiming they were just checking on me and had accidentally taken the wrong card from my purse. Robert insisted I was confused, that I must have dreamed it all. Detective Johnson finally intervened. "That's enough. I have the video evidence, and the bank has records of the attempted withdrawals. We also have the card that was retained by the ATM, which I'm sure will have fingerprints that match both of you." As this sank in, their strategies diverged. Robert maintained they were just trying to help manage my finances because they were worried about me. Diane, seeing the writing on the wall, began distancing herself from the plan, suggesting it had all been Robert's idea. After taking formal statements from everyone, Detective Johnson explained the next steps of the investigation. She advised me to consult with an elder law attorney and to consider filing for a protective order. As she was leaving, my daughter Jennifer called. I hadn't told her what was happening yet, not wanting to worry her when she lived across the country in California. But somehow, she sensed something was wrong. "Mom, is everything okay? I had this weird feeling I should call you today." With Detective Johnson nodding encouragingly, I took a deep breath and told Jennifer everything. Her shock and anger were palpable even through the phone. "I'm booking a flight right now," she insisted. "I'll be there tomorrow. Don't let Robert or Diane back into the house until I get there." After I hung up, Detective Johnson reassured me. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Reynolds. Elder financial abuse is unfortunately common, even from family members, but you've taken all the right steps to protect yourself." As she left, I watched Robert and Diane sitting in stunned silence at my dining room table, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. For the first time in months, despite the pain and betrayal, I felt something I hadn't expected: strength. After Detective Johnson left, an uncomfortable silence filled my living room. Robert sat with his head in his hands while Diane paced nervously, occasionally glaring at both of us. The facade had crumbled, yet neither seemed ready to admit the truth. I decided to break the silence. I think we need to talk about what happened. Robert's head snapped up. Nothing happened, Mom. This is all a huge misunderstanding. We were worried about you, that's all. Worried enough to sneak into my bedroom at 1:30 inches the morning and take my credit card? I asked, keeping my voice steady. We noticed your purse was open when we checked on you, Robert insisted, the lie coming easily to him. The card was falling out, so I took it for safekeeping. I was going to tell you this morning, and the conversation about withdrawing $1,000 from 2 different ATMs using my PIN? Was that also for my protection? Robert's face reddened. That's not. You must have misheard. I have it on video. Robert, I reminded him. Every word. Diane suddenly turned on him. This was your idea, Robert. You told me she wouldn't notice, that we'd put it back before morning. Her voice had risen to a near shriek. You said it wasn't really stealing because she's your mother. Robert looked betrayed. Diane, what are you doing? Shut up. I'm not going to jail for you, she shot back. I have children to think about. I sat watching them turn on each other, feeling a strange detachment. These were the people I'd invited into my home countless times, who I'd helped financially, who I'd trusted. Now they couldn't even maintain a unified lie for 5 minutes. Stop it, both of you, I finally said, my voice cutting through their argument. I don't want to hear any more lies. Robert switched tactics, his face suddenly softening. Mom, we were desperate. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We didn't know what else to do. You could have asked me for help, I pointed out. You said no last time, and we need more than you've been willing to give. So you decided to take it instead? It's not like that, he insisted. We were going to pay it back. It was just a loan. A loan is something you ask for, not something you take in the middle of the night, I replied, my voice finally betraying my hurt. Diane had stopped pacing and was now gathering her things. I can't do this anymore. Robert, I'll be waiting in the car. After she left, Robert tried one more approach. Mom, please don't do this. If you press charges, it will ruin everything. I could lose my job, our house, everything. You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from me, I said quietly. It's not stealing when it's family, he insisted, the entitlement in his voice shocking me even now. Everything you have will be mine eventually anyway. The room fell silent as we both registered what he'd just said. In that moment, the mask fell completely, revealing the ugly truth beneath. My son viewed my possessions, my money, my very life as simply a waiting period before he received his inheritance. I think you should leave now, I said, standing up. Jennifer will be here tomorrow, and I need time to think. Jennifer? He scoffed. She hasn't bothered to visit in over a year, and suddenly she's flying in to save the day? She just wants to make sure she gets her share. That's enough, Robert, I said firmly. Please leave my house. Your house? He sneered. The house I grew up in? The house Dad wanted me to have? Your father wanted no such thing, and you know it, I replied. Now please leave before I call Detective Johnson back. He stood up, towering over me physically, but somehow appearing smaller than I'd ever seen him. This isn't over, Mom. You're clearly not thinking straight. Maybe it's time we discussed your mental capacity more formally. The threat was clear, but it no longer frightened me. Goodbye, Robert. After he left, I changed the locks. The locksmith gave me a sympathetic look when I explained it was because of my son, but he didn't ask questions. By evening, I had new locks, a new security system Elaine's grandson installed, and a temporary protective order Detective Johnson had helped me file. I was just making myself a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. Looking through the peephole, I saw Diane standing alone on my porch, looking nervous. Against my better judgment, I opened the door but kept the security chain on. What do you want, Diane? I need to talk to you, she said quietly, looking over her shoulder. Without Robert, cautiously, I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table, hands trembling slightly, as she accepted the cup of tea I offered. Robert doesn't know I'm here, she began. He'd be furious if he found out. Why are you here? She took a deep breath. I want to make a deal. I'll testify that it was all Robert's idea if you'll drop the charges against me. I shouldn't have been surprised by her betrayal of Robert, yet somehow I was. That's not how it works, Diane. I saw you both. You were equal participants. No, you don't understand, she insisted. He's been taking money from you for years, not just the loans you know about. He has a copy of your checkbook and has been writing checks to himself with a signature that looks like yours. My blood ran cold. What? He's been doing it since before your husband died, she continued, gaining confidence as she saw my shock. Small amounts at first, then more. He has a gambling problem, Margaret. That's where all our money goes. The vacations, the cars. It's all for show. We're drowning in debt. Part of me wondered if this was just another manipulation, but the details she provided were too specific to be invented on the spot. She even pulled out her phone to show me photos she'd taken of forged checks. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I'm scared, she admitted. Not just of going to jail, but of him. When he realized you had evidence against us, something changed in him. I've never seen him so angry. Before I could respond, the sound of breaking glass came from my back door. Then Robert's voice, slurred with what I assumed was alcohol. Mom, open up. We need to talk this out. Diane's face went pale. Oh God. He followed me. He's drunk. I reached for my phone to call 911, but before I could dial, Robert appeared in the kitchen doorway, a broken pane from my back door having given him access to the lock. Well, isn't this cozy? He sneered, looking between us. My wife and my mother, conspiring against me? Robert, you need to leave, I said as calmly as I could, my finger hovering over the emergency call button. He noticed Diane's phone on the table with the pictures of the forged checks still visible on the screen. His face contorted with rage. You backstabbing bitch, he shouted at her. After everything I've done for you, what happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Robert lunged toward Diane, but I stepped between them, my protective instincts kicking in despite everything. He shoved me aside, harder than he probably intended in his drunken state, and I fell against the kitchen counter, hitting my head. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of sirens in the distance and Diane screaming into my phone. She's hurt. Please hurry. I woke up in Springfield Memorial Hospital with a moderate concussion and a familiar face looking down at me with concern. Jennifer had caught an earlier flight and arrived while I was still unconscious. Mom, she said softly, taking my hand. Thank God you're awake. Jennifer, I croaked, my mouth dry. What happened? She filled me in on the details. After I fell, Diane had called 911. The police arrived quickly and arrested Robert for assault and breaking and entering. He was being held without bail due to the violent nature of the incident and his previous threats. Where's Diane? I asked. She gave her statement to the police and then left, Jennifer explained. She seemed pretty shaken up. The detective said she's cooperating fully now. Over the next few days, the full extent of the family fallout became apparent. Word spread quickly through our extended family. People took sides, as they often do, in family crises. My sister Ruth called from Arizona, initially skeptical of my version of events. Are you sure you're not exaggerating, Margaret? Robert has always been such a good boy, but when I explained the details and mentioned the forged checks, Ruth grew quiet. He asked me for a loan 3 months ago, she finally admitted. $10,000. Said it was for a business opportunity that couldn't wait. Did you give it to him? I asked. Yes, she said quietly. He hasn't paid back a penny, and he won't return my calls now. Ruth wasn't the only one. As word spread, other family members came forward with similar stories. Cousin Edward had loaned Robert money for a medical emergency that never existed. Uncle George had invested in a business venture that turned out to be fictitious. The picture became clearer. Robert had been systematically defrauding family members for years, using his charm and our collective trust against us. Meanwhile, Jennifer became my rock. She extended her stay indefinitely, working remotely from my house and helping me navigate the legal proceedings. She accompanied me to appointments with Detective Johnson and to meetings with the district attorney's office, which was now pursuing charges of elder abuse, fraud, and assault. We have a strong case, Mrs. Reynolds, the assistant district attorney, Miss Patel, assured me. Between your video evidence, the bank records, Diane's testimony, and the assault witnessed by emergency responders, Mr. Reynolds is facing serious consequences. The decision to maintain the charges against my own son was the hardest I've ever had to make. I spoke with a therapist specializing in elder abuse, Dr. Collins, who helped me work through my conflicted feelings. What you're experiencing is completely normal, she told me during one session. The betrayal by a child is particularly traumatic because it violates our most fundamental trust. You're mourning not just what happened, but what you thought your relationship was. I keep wondering where I went wrong, I admitted. How did I raise someone who could do this? This isn't about your parenting, Dr. Collins said firmly. Adults make their own choices. Robert had the same upbringing as Jennifer, and she turned out very differently. This is about his choices, not your failings. Those words helped, but the guilt still crept in during quiet moments. I found support in unexpected places, though. My church formed a small group of seniors who checked on me regularly. Old friends I'd lost touch with reached out after hearing what happened. Most surprisingly, Elaine organized a support group specifically for seniors who had experienced financial abuse by family members. The stories I heard there broke my heart but also made me feel less alone. Gloria, whose daughter had drained her retirement account. Walter, whose grandson had stolen his identity and ruined his credit. Sophia, whose nephew had pressured her into signing over her house. We shared resources, warned each other about common manipulation tactics, and most importantly, reminded each other that we deserved better, that we weren't to blame. Robert tried repeatedly to contact me from jail. At first, I refused his calls. Then, on Dr. Collins's advice, I agreed to a supervised conversation with her present. His approach had changed completely. Gone was the angry, entitled son who had broken into my home. In his place was a tearful, remorseful man, claiming to have seen the error of his ways. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he sobbed over the phone. "I don't know what came over me. I need help. Please drop the charges so I can get treatment for my gambling addiction." Dr. Collins watched my face carefully as I replied, "I love you, Robert. I always will. But you need to face the consequences of your actions. The best way I can help you now is to let the legal process run its course." His tone changed instantly, the mask of remorse slipping away. "You're choosing your money over your own son? After everything I've done for you?" I ended the call then, my resolve strengthened rather than weakened by his rapid shift back to manipulation. Diane filed for divorce shortly after Robert's arrest. She approached me through her lawyer, offering to testify against him in exchange for leniency in her own case. The prosecutor agreed, seeing her as a valuable witness rather than the primary offender. I also received a restraining order against Robert, which was difficult but necessary. Jennifer helped me through the paperwork and court appearance, her steady presence, a constant reminder that family bonds could be sources of strength rather than exploitation. During this time, I reconnected with friends I'd been gradually isolated from as Robert and Diane had taken up more of my time and attention. My friend Phyllis, whom I hadn't seen in nearly a year, burst into tears when she saw me at church. "I've been so worried about you," she said, embracing me. "Every time I called, Robert or Diane said you were resting or not feeling well." Eventually, I stopped trying. The isolation, I realized, had been deliberate. Another tactic to make me more vulnerable, more dependent on them. The realization made me angry but also determined to rebuild my social connections. The most difficult conversation was with Robert's teenage children, my grandchildren. At 17 and 15, Amy and Jason were old enough to understand what was happening, but still deeply confused and hurt by it all. Jennifer arranged for them to visit me without either of their parents present. They sat awkwardly in my living room, clearly unsure what to say. "I know this is hard for you both," I began gently. "And I want you to know that none of this is your fault. Dad says you're making it all up because you're getting dementia," Amy said bluntly, her eyes challenging me. Rather than being offended, I appreciated her honesty. "I understand why he'd tell you that. But it's not true. Would you like to see some of the evidence for yourselves?" I showed them a small portion of the video, just enough to make it clear what had happened without traumatizing them further. Their faces fell as they watched their parents sneaking around my bedroom, discussing how to take my money. I still love your father, I assured them. And this doesn't change how much I love you both. You are always welcome in my home, no matter what happens with your parents. Jason, the quieter of the two, finally spoke up. I knew something was wrong. Dad's been so stressed, and they fight all the time about money. I heard him tell Mom once that once you were out of the picture, their problems would be solved. His words stung, but I kept my expression neutral for their sake. People say things they don't mean when they're desperate. Your father needs help, and hopefully, he'll get it through this process. By the end of their visit, some trust had been restored. They promised to stay in touch directly with me rather than through their parents, and I made it clear my door would always be open to them. As the legal proceedings continued, I took steps to secure my finances permanently. With Jennifer's help, I set up a trust with ironclad protections. I gave her medical power of attorney, but maintained complete control of my finances while I was able. We created a detailed succession plan for if and when I truly needed assistance managing my affairs. It was a painful process, acknowledging that I wouldn't live forever and planning for my eventual decline. But it was also empowering, knowing that I was making these decisions on my terms, not having them forced upon me through manipulation or deceit. Throughout this difficult period, I kept remembering something my husband Harold used to say. Family isn't just who you're related to, it's who stands by you when times are tough. By that definition, my true family had revealed itself through this ordeal, and it was both smaller and larger than I'd previously thought. 3 months after that terrible night in my kitchen, I sat in a courtroom watching my son plead guilty to multiple charges. The prosecutor had offered a plea deal that Robert, on advice from his public defender, had accepted. He would plead guilty to elder financial abuse, attempted credit card fraud, breaking and entering, and simple assault in exchange for a reduced sentence. Seeing him in his orange jumpsuit, shoulders slumped in defeat, was one of the hardest moments of my life. This was my son, my firstborn, the baby I had nursed, and the child whose scraped knees I had bandaged. Now he stood before a judge, admitting to crimes against me, his own mother. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I had prepared for this moment, writing and rewriting my words with Dr. Collins's help, trying to find the balance between expressing my pain and maintaining my dignity. I approached the podium, my hands trembling slightly as I unfolded my paper. Robert wouldn't look at me, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "The financial impact of my son's actions can be calculated in dollars and cents. The bank records show exactly how much was taken, but the true cost cannot be measured so easily. The trust that was broken, the sense of security that was shattered, the family bonds that have been damaged, these have no price tag." I continued, describing how the betrayal had affected me, how it had forced me to question my judgment and my worth. I spoke of the fear I'd felt when he broke into my home, the shock of physical violence from someone who should have protected me, but I also spoke of hope. "I believe in accountability, Your Honor. I believe that facing consequences is how we learn and grow. My son made terrible choices, but he is still my son. My hope is that whatever sentence the court imposes will not only protect me and others from further harm, but will also provide him with the help he clearly needs." When I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even Robert had finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. Whether they were genuine or another performance, I couldn't tell anymore. The judge thanked me for my statement before turning to Robert. "Mr. Reynolds, the court recognizes your guilty plea and cooperation. However, the nature of your crimes, particularly those committed against your elderly mother who trusted and supported you, demands significant consequences." She sentenced him to 3 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months, contingent upon completion of gambling addiction, treatment, and financial counseling programs. Additionally, he would be required to pay restitution for all verified financial losses, perform community service upon release, and remain under court supervision for 5 years after serving his sentence. "You violated one of our society's most sacred trusts, Mr. Reynolds," the judge concluded. "I hope you use this time to reflect on the damage you've caused and work toward making amends, though some things can never be fully repaired." Diane, who had testified against Robert as agreed, received a suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, mandatory financial counseling, and community service requirements. Her cooperation had indeed earned her leniency, though the divorce proceedings were proving far more contentious. After the sentencing, Detective Johnson approached me outside the courthouse. "Mrs. Reynolds, I want you to know how much I admire your courage throughout this process. Many cases like yours never make it to court because the victims can't bear to testify against family members. I didn't do it to punish Robert," I explained. "I did it to protect myself and others, and hopefully to get him the help he needs." She nodded understandingly. "Whatever your reasons, you've made a difference. Cases like yours help set precedents that protect other seniors. You should be proud." Pride wasn't exactly what I felt leaving the courthouse that day. Relief, perhaps, a sense of closure, and deep sadness for what might have been if different choices had been made. The media had taken some interest in the case, with the local paper running a story about elder financial abuse featuring my situation anonymously. I agreed to be interviewed without using my name, hoping that sharing my experience might help others recognize the warning signs I had missed for too long. In the weeks that followed, I received letters from Robert. The first few were angry and accusatory, blaming me for destroying our family and overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. I read them with Dr. Collins, who helped me see them for what they were, continued attempts at manipulation. After about a month in prison, the tone of his letters began to change. He wrote about the financial counseling program he was attending, about realizations he was having regarding his behavior patterns. He described his gambling addiction, how it had started with sports betting in college and gradually consumed his life. He apologized, not just for the credit card incident, but for years of manipulation and deceit. I read these letters with cautious hope, but also healthy skepticism. Real change takes time and consistent effort. Words on paper are easy. Sustained behavioral change is much harder. I responded with kind but firm boundaries, making it clear that any future relationship would depend on his continued commitment to rehabilitation and his respect for my autonomy. Meanwhile, I had reconnected with Robert's children, my grandchildren. Amy and Jason visited regularly, sometimes with Jennifer and sometimes on their own. Their resilience amazed me. Despite the turmoil in their home life, both were doing well in school and maintained positive attitudes. "Dad writes to us too," Jason told me during one visit. "He sounds different, more like how he used to be when I was little, before all the money problems started." "I hope that's true," I said carefully. "People can change if they really want to and work at it." "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" Amy asked, her young face serious. I considered my answer carefully. Forgiveness is a process, not a single decision. I'm working on it, for my sake as much as his. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or putting myself at risk again. It means letting go of the anger and moving forward. The most unexpected outcome of this ordeal was my newfound role as an advocate. What had begun as a small support group organized by Elaine had grown into a formal community organization focused on preventing elder abuse. I was asked to share my story at senior centers across the county and even spoke at a state legislative hearing on strengthening elder protection laws. "Financial abuse of seniors is a silent epidemic," I told the legislators. "Many victims are too ashamed to come forward or too afraid of losing family relationships. We need stronger protections, better education, and resources specifically designed to help seniors maintain their independence safely." The legislation passed, establishing better screening protocols for financial institutions and increasing penalties for those convicted of elder financial abuse. It was a small victory in a much larger battle, but it gave meaning to my painful experience. 6 months after Robert's sentencing, I received a letter from his prison counselor. Robert had given permission for the counselor to contact me as part of his therapeutic process. The counselor confirmed that Robert was actively participating in his treatment programs and showing signs of genuine progress in understanding the patterns that had led to his criminal behavior. While it's too early to make any guarantees about long-term change, the counselor wrote, "Mr. Reynolds has shown consistent engagement with the therapeutic process and has expressed sincere remorse for his actions against you and others. As part of his recovery, he would like to know if you would consider participating in a supervised family counseling session in the future." I discussed the request with Dr. Collins, Jennifer, and Elaine before making my decision. "I think I'm ready," I told them. Not for instant reconciliation, but for a conversation. A first step. The path to justice had been difficult, but necessary. The consequences Robert faced were painful for all of us, but they created the possibility for genuine change and healing that enablement never would have allowed. I couldn't know what the future held for our family, but for the first time in years, I faced that future from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. As I prepared for my first supervised visit with Robert, I felt a complex mix of emotions: apprehension, hope, sadness, and something else I hadn't expected: pride in myself for having the courage to stand up for my own worth and dignity, even when it meant standing against someone I loved. 6 months can change a lot in a person's life. As spring blossomed around my little ranch house, I realized I had changed too, in ways both subtle and profound. The woman who had pretended to be confused and forgetful to catch her son in the act of theft had been replaced by someone more confident, more assertive, and paradoxically, more compassionate. My home felt like truly mine again. With Jennifer's help, I had repainted the living room in cheerful yellow, updated the security system, and rearranged the furniture to better suit my needs rather than maintaining the layout Harold had preferred. Small changes, perhaps, but symbolic of my reclaimed independence. My financial situation was more secure than ever. The trust Jennifer and I had established provided excellent protection while still giving me full access and control. I had regular meetings with my financial advisor, who patiently explained everything in detail and treated me with respect rather than condescension. But the most significant changes were in my relationships and daily activities. I had become an active member of the Senior Financial Protection Group that grew from Elaine's initial support circle. We now had official nonprofit status, a small office in the community center, and a regular column in the local newspaper offering advice and warnings about the latest scams targeting seniors. Twice a week, I taught financial literacy classes specifically designed for older adults. We covered everything from online banking security to recognizing manipulation tactics to properly documenting financial arrangements with family members. The key is communication and documentation, I would tell my students. Love your family, trust your family, but get everything in writing and keep copies in a secure location they can't access. My relationship with Jennifer had deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. Our weekly video calls had become daily during the crisis, and even after she returned to California, we maintained the habit. She was planning to relocate closer to me within the year, not out of obligation but from a genuine desire to be nearer. "Dad would be so proud of how you've handled all this, Mom," she told me during one call. "You've turned something terrible into something that helps others." The mention of Harold made me smile rather than tear up. Another small sign of healing. Your father always did say that the measure of a person isn't what happens to them, but what they do about it. My grandchildren visited regularly, sometimes staying for weekends. Amy had applied to colleges, including one near me, and Jason had joined the school newspaper, inspired by the articles I'd helped write for the nonprofit. And Robert? That was more complicated. After 3 supervised visits at the prison counseling center, we had established a cautious, limited relationship. He was continuing his treatment programs and, according to his counselors, making genuine progress in understanding his gambling addiction and manipulative behaviors. During our most recent visit, he had asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, do you think you'll ever be able to trust me again?" I considered my answer carefully. Trust isn't binary, Robert. It's not all or nothing. I believe you're working hard to change, and I respect that. But trust is built through consistent actions over time. We're taking small steps now, and we'll see where they lead. He had nodded, accepting this answer without the defensive reaction he might have shown in the past. That's fair. More than fair. Considering everything. Diane and I had limited contact, mainly regarding the grandchildren. Her divorce from Robert was finalized, and she had moved to another state to be near her sister. According to Amy, she was working as a receptionist and taking accounting courses at community college. She sent me a letter of apology that seemed sincere, but I maintained cautious boundaries with her as well. One unexpected blessing came from reconnecting with my wider circle of friends and family. My sister Ruth visited from Arizona, and stayed for a month. Old nursing colleagues I hadn't seen in years became regular lunch companions. My church friends organized a weekly card game that became the highlight of my social calendar. I was sitting on my porch with Elaine one evening, watching the sunset and discussing plans for our nonprofit's upcoming workshop. When she asked, "Did you ever imagine your life would take this turn at 72? I laughed. Not in my wildest dreams. Or nightmares, for that matter. You know what I admire most about you, Margaret? You didn't just survive this. You used it to create something meaningful. Not everyone would have had that strength." Her words made me reflect on the journey of the past year. I think we all have that strength, but sometimes we don't discover it until we're tested. I certainly didn't know I had it in me. What would you tell someone who's just realizing they might be in a similar situation with family members? She asked. I thought about this carefully. I'd tell them that family love shouldn't require the sacrifice of your dignity or security. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. That documentation isn't distrust, it's protection. And most importantly, that they deserve better and aren't alone. Later that week, I received a letter from a woman who had attended one of my workshops. She had recognized her son's behavior in my story and had quietly taken steps to protect herself. You gave me permission to acknowledge what was happening, she wrote. You helped me understand that loving my son doesn't mean allowing him to exploit me. Reading her words brought tears to my eyes. If my painful experience could help even one person avoid a similar fate, perhaps it had served a greater purpose than I initially understood. The following day, Robert called from prison with news that he'd been accepted into a work release program that would begin after he completed 18 months of his sentence. It was a positive step toward rehabilitation, and I expressed genuine happiness for him. I've been thinking about what happens when I get out, he said cautiously. I know I can't expect things to go back to how they were before. I've been working on a formal amends plan with my counselor, starting with paying back the money I took from you and others in the family. That's commendable, Robert, I said sincerely. Actions speak louder than words. I know, he acknowledged. I have a long road ahead to rebuild trust, but I'm committed to it, one day at a time. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of cautious hope. People could change if they truly wanted to and put in the hard work. Whether Robert's transformation would prove lasting remained to be seen, but I chose to be optimistic while maintaining healthy boundaries. That evening, as I checked my secure online banking accounts, I reflected on everything I'd learned. Financial independence was about more than money. It was about agency, dignity, and self-determination. These were rights that didn't diminish with age. If anything, they became more precious. I thought of all the seniors I'd met who felt trapped in exploitative situations with family members, afraid to speak up for fear of losing relationships or being seen as difficult. I thought of how isolation made us vulnerable, and how connection and education were our best protections. As I closed my laptop, I noticed my reflection in the darkened screen. Gray hair, wrinkles earned through years of laughter and tears, eyes that had seen both betrayal and renewal. I smiled at that reflection, at the woman who had found her voice when it mattered most. You did good, Margaret, I whispered to myself. Harold would be proud. What a journey this has been, sharing my story with all of you. I hope that by opening up about my experience, I've helped someone out there who might be facing similar challenges with family members. Family relationships are complex, and when money gets involved, they can become even more complicated. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Has anyone in your family ever betrayed your trust? How did you handle it? Please hit that like button if you found value in my story, and consider subscribing to hear more real-life experiences from others who have faced difficult family situations and found their way through. Your support means the world to me. And remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and reclaim your dignity. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the strength you need if you ever face similar challenges.